Hey everybody, I'm Katie, and I want to welcome you to this week's episode of Healthy Republic. I'm joined today by special guest Adam MacLeod, law professor at Faulkner University in Montgomery, Alabama, where he has been teaching in the Jones School of Law since 2007. This year, Professor MacLeod is a Thomas Edison Fellow at George Mason University. He teaches courses on the topics of property, jurisprudence, private law theory, and public policy. And he is also co-editor of the book Foundations of Law, which was published by the Carolina Academic Press this year. Professor MacLeod, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Katie. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, I contacted you after seeing an article you wrote for the New Boston Post, in which you explained something you noticed in your Foundations of Law course about 2 weeks into the fall semester. This is a course taken by first-year law students. So these millennial students have gone through their K-12 education, and they've gone through their bachelor's degree. Tell us a little bit about this course and its profound purpose to beginning law students.
Yeah, our Foundations course is pretty unusual in law schools these days. It's the sort of stuff that used to be taught at the undergraduate or even high school level, what we would today call high school level. Knowledge that students would, a couple generations ago, go to law school with already in pocket. It includes classic texts, The Trial of Socrates, Code of Hammurabi, writings from Thomas Aquinas and great English and American common law jurists like William Blackstone and Joseph Story. And it's really sort of foundational stuff, formal logic, history of Anglo-American institutions like private property and the jury trial. And about 7 or 8 years ago, we began to discover that students increasingly were coming to law school without really any of these things in their toolkits. They weren't particularly adept at formal and logical reasoning. They didn't really have a very strong background in the history of American legal institutions and norms. So we created this course to be something of a remedial education for them as they enter law school in the basic things that we think they should know. But then we've also added some elements to it to really help it make it a little more advanced, showing them how really foundational first principles and concepts like liberty and due process show up throughout their legal education and are going to be important in their legal careers. So it's really sort of a big picture kind of course. It asks questions like, what is law? And do we have an obligation to obey it, even when it's unjust? So the point is to get them to think critically, particularly about their own views, but really about prevailing notions about what law is and what it's for, and to get them to ask really important questions in conversation with great ancient conversation partners and contemporary ones.
Yeah, and it sounds like what used to be a remedial course, or what used to be, I guess, the necessity to create this course has now become, even in the first 2 weeks, you said you noticed something, and this is what compelled you to write this speech. And I just want to read the opening lines of your speech. Before I can teach you how to reason, I must first teach you how to rid yourself of unreason. For many of you have not yet been educated. You have been diseducated. To put it bluntly, you have been indoctrinated. Before you learn how to think, you must first learn how to stop unthinking. And I guess those lines right there, I mean, it says it all right there. You know, it's not that your students don't want to learn. It's just that, as you say, they've been diseducated or indoctrinated. So tell us what your aim was with these specific words and how you proceeded then through your speech.
Yeah, the little speech and the essay which grew out of it were both a little bit deliberately provocative. But what I've noticed over the last, we've taught this course now, I think this is our 6th or 7th year teaching this course. What I've noticed over the last 2 or 3 years in particular is students have increasingly been resistant to the wisdom contained, particularly in the older writings, it's Aristotle and Sophocles and Hammurabi and Aquinas and so forth. The Bible we include, and are very, very dismissive of these things because these people held views that are supposed to be discredited or just old. So the first couple weeks of the course this year was actually a little bit frustrating for me because we were trying to dig into things like the Code of Hammurabi and the Trial of Socrates, and the students, not all of them, but most of them, were really quite dismissive of what they were encountering there. And as I explained in the essay, we're dismissing these great ideas with sort of contemporary labels that you hear in contemporary political dialogue nowadays all the time, isms like racism and cisgenderism and materialism and all this sort of stuff, and then the usual shibboleths about fairness and equality and diversity, and it was really an impediment to them thinking, not even thinking critically, just thinking at all about the texts they were reading, and so I decided to provoke them a little bit. And it worked. It got their attention.
Yeah, and so in the speech, you do tackle kind of three main issues, and then those became those three course guidelines. And so that first one you kind of mentioned already is the isms, and isms get slapped on basically anything you're talking about in college classrooms today. And they use it as a lens, and you have to look through that lens with some specific ism. You can't just look at the author. So what were some of the isms specifically that the students were putting onto your text when you were presenting them?
Yeah. Well, isms can be, like any label, can be helpful shorthand to identify or stand in for a body of ideas or a system of thought or institutions which are familiar and which can be critiqued. So, for example, if someone speaks of capitalism or communism or socialism, we tend to have a pretty good idea what's being discussed, and not always. I mean, sometimes we need to dig a little bit deeper beneath those labels, but generally speaking, where you have an established concept that has a scholarly vernacular attached to it, and we can say, yeah, I can identify what you're talking about there. That's helpful. What's less helpful is when students use terms like racism, for example, to mean anything which the result of which is a disparity or an inequality of results as between various racial or ethnic groups. Another one that I hear often is materialism. What do you mean by that? Do you mean, for example, the view that all phenomena in human interactions are determined and caused by material forces? Do you mean greed or selfishness? Or do you simply mean that I shop at Costco on my way home from church because they have good prices and I can feed my kids? And I'm supposed to somehow feel guilty about that. They're not particularly helpful labels when the students aren't very clear on what they're using them to identify. It's just sort of a way of giving the back of your hand to things that one finds disagreeable or just unusual or uncomfortable. And that's what I was trying to push back on. I don't mind the use of labels in the classroom as long as we're clear on what we're talking about. And so the first guideline is, if you're going to use an ism, you have to be very clear about what it is that you're describing, and very clear that you understand what it is that you're describing and critiquing.
Yeah, and then you added to that a second point, which goes along with those isms and what students have been indoctrinated with, and it's the two moral values of diversity and equality. And you said that basically that's all they know, and that they're being taught that diversity and equality mean everything. But you taught them the incoherence of that argument. What's the problem with this perspective of equality and diversity?
Well, there's nothing at all wrong with speaking of equality and speaking of diversity. Again, if we know what we're talking about, our Declaration of Independence states that it's self-evident that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. This is supposed to be a founding principle. Now, the question, what does that mean? What is equality? What sort of norm are we aspiring to is actually a contested question in American jurisprudence. Is it equality of opportunity? Is it formal equality before the law? Is it an equality of result? Is it group equality, that various groups are supposed to be treated just the same? These are controversial questions, and they're exactly the kind of questions we created this course to explore. And so the use that I found my students making more often than not was a very simplistic understanding of equality, meaning sameness. And anything that's not the same is somehow suspect, or they wouldn't express it in terms of injustice, but unjust. And that's what I was trying to avoid, is getting them to think critically about the meaning of equality requires them to understand that the way they're using it is not just simplistic and not particularly helpful, but also controversial, and that people can disagree about these things. Similarly with diversity, are we talking about pluralism here? Are we talking about ordered liberty? These are contested ideas, and if you are uncritically just using it as a label, you're going to miss all of that nuance and all those interesting questions.
And then I think the third point, and the point that comes with it, talk a little bit about students and how everything they do, they express their feelings. They have feelings about everything. And you told your students in class that if they ever begin a statement with the words, "I feel," they're not going to be able to continue. And what is it that they have to do before they can continue to discuss their point?
Yeah, I thought I was being very accommodating and diverse. I told them they could either cluck like a chicken or choose some other barnyard animal. The clucking like a chicken is what's attracted all the attention. So I've received in my email inbox and other comment strings and so forth a lot of cluck clucks in the last few days. The basic point that I'm trying to make there is the point which my students encounter in Aristotle in the first week of class, and that is that what it means to be a human being as opposed to some other kind of being is to be both an animal and a rational animal. That is, we have a nature that is embodied, that we certainly have feelings, we certainly have passions and appetites. That's an important aspect of who we are. But the idea of human excellence, of virtue in the study of law, as in any other human pursuit, inherently entails the exercise of reason. It's a right ordering of our passions and appetites and desires and feelings toward what is good, toward what is reasonable to do and pursue and choose. So that's what we're after there. Now, there are lots of people who disagree with Aristotle on this, and we read them in our course. We read people like Jeremy Bentham and Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., who don't perceive reason holding that sort of office in human affairs, and that's fine. But at the very least, I want my students to understand the argument that to be human means to reason together. And so feelings by themselves, there's no reason why feelings by themselves should command our respect or attention, unless they correspond to something that the rest of us can all access through the exercise of reason as well. Are you referring to something that the rest of us should care about? There's not necessarily a reason for us to care about your feelings if it's just yours, right? Unless it corresponds with something that's out there, objective in the world that we can all access and discuss.
And I think the burning question then at the end of this semester is how many chicken clucks did you end up hearing by the end?
Just two.
Just two. Oh, wow. It seems like the students progressed quite well then through your 3 ground rules that you set for them.
Yeah, and I have to say I learned a lot this semester as well. This was a very instructive experience for me. In the recent years, I've tried doing this sort of what's become a popular way of teaching students at the graduate level, which is just asking better questions or finding more creative ways to get them engaged. And my approach, as you see from the essay this semester, was just to be the heavy and exercise some authority and lay down the law. And lo and behold, it worked. We had, I think, the best semester I've had in years in this course. The students, by the end, their first instinct was always to reach for some reasoned argument, always to appeal to some great thinker that we had read during the course of the semester, or some landmark judicial decision or proclamation. I should add, during the course of the semester, we're reading Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. We're reading his first inaugural address. We're reading King's letter from a Birmingham jail. We're reading landmark Supreme Court decisions. So we're trying to illustrate these principles and ideas and show how they show up in the real world. And the students, I think, were much better equipped to engage with and learn from those materials as well as a result. They deserve credit. They responded to this very, very well. And I think going forward, I'm going to begin at the very beginning of the semester laying down the law. And I think the semester is going to progress better as a result.
Excellent. And as a current college student, or really anyone in academia, I please take the time to read these wise words by Professor MacLeod. You can find the entire speech on freedomproject.com. Just click on Healthy Republic. Wise words to begin any semester with, I think. So again, Professor MacLeod, thank you for being here. I hope you have a wonderful break and a very Merry Christmas.
Yeah, you as well. Thanks so much for having me.
Hey everybody, if you like that video, head over to freedomproject.com and check out more videos and articles by moi.